It's a real pleasure for me to be here. I spent quite a bit of time here on the project, and it was quite a special project for me because it was unique as an architect to be working in a broader urban realm rather than a conventional architecture building. So I'm going to go through a few things, a little bit of background, and then into the mobility, the streetcar aspect, and then look a little bit at what's happening now on St. Clair, and number 4 there, placemaking, some unique opportunities that we're taking advantage of during the construction. And then the last one, which you can't see, is opportunities. It's just basically a summary of the presentation. So we started with the Avenue study commissioned by the city. Essentially, it was prompted by the fact that this region is going to grow by about 2.5 million people by 2031. So we've got a plan on where to put these people and how to move them. The growth plan, the provincial growth plan, calls for a coordination of planning and infrastructure, a promotion of public transit, encouragement of mixed use and sustainable development, and the preservation of rural and natural resources. So the way to do that is through intensification as well as public transit, and that's what we have here through along the corridor of St. Clair. The city's official plan essentially mimics the provincial growth plan. It identifies where in the city we need to have this growth. Where does it make sense? Along the avenues is one of these locations along St. Clair. And how do you do that? Well, you invest in civic resources. A number of recommendations came out of the Avenue study. I'm going to focus on a few of the, just a few of them. Oh, sorry, I thought someone couldn't hear. A goal was to plan a vibrant pedestrian environment. So improve on what was already, I would argue, a vibrant pedestrian environment, but it did need some help. Encourage revitalization and intensification, which I think we're seeing now. Create new public amenity spaces, which are those opportunity sites that I mentioned. Encourage high-quality mixed-use developments. Again, that's the intensification I've been talking about. And environmental sustainability, and I would argue that's inherent in a higher-order public transit. So, unfortunately, this image is washed out, but what you see here is essentially a surface parking lot, and that is something that's difficult to have when you want intensification. So it's a prime development site. How do you do that? Well, you've got the existing housing stock and commercial development, which is quite low, and you increase that, and a number of people ask, well, how do you increase that? How do you come up with the right height? And essentially, it's however wide your streetscape, your building face to building face is, the right of way, that determines the height of your building, and that does a few things. It allows sun to get to the street for a good portion of the year, for a good portion of the day, and it also mitigates this condition here. And this is what a lot of people struggle with that live in the neighborhood. They're accustomed to the lower density. They live in a lower density. So when they see this, it can be a little frightening for them. The mid-rise guidelines that the city commissioned, which we were also the authors of with the city, address this condition through step backs and angular plane setbacks, which So the development steps its way down to something that is more manageable on the residential side. The other thing the Avenue study looked at is circulation and parking. There were a lot of poor conditions with a lot of curb cuts along St. Clair, which made for a very unsafe pedestrian environment. Those conditions were improved through the construction, and the other, I think, condition that, sorry, I'm struggling with this little clicker. The other condition that was built upon was the rear lane system, which is an excellent system to take pressure off of St. Clair, to take traffic pressure off of St. Clair. So it's great for deliveries and things like that. So on to mobility and design. I'm going to talk about the positive and the great things that happened through the process. There was a lot of controversy, and by all means, if we want to discuss it during the question and answer, that'd be great. But I'm going to look at sort of where we got to. So the line itself is about 6.5 kilometers long, about 25 stops, and in moderate traffic, it's about a 31-minute ride. What the city wanted to achieve with the line itself was speed, consistency, and dependability, or the TTC wanted to achieve that. So taking it out of traffic, that's what they did. So that's sort of your inherent simple goal. The great thing about this project was it did do a lot more. So this is quite washed out, but these are renderings where we were testing streetscape, essentially the streetscape's design, paving materials, the scale of the shelters, the organization of the public art. Again, another rendering, testing ideas. Through the construction process, we looked at coatings of the poles, improved coatings, consistent coloring for the entire line, a contemporary, fresh look for the streetscape. So you can notice that I'm talking about sort of a broader vision of intensification and what the streetcar can do, down to the nitty-gritty of pole design and coatings for durability. And again, a mock-up of the shelter at the manufacturer's fabrication site. Again, all these things were tested to ensure that they would last and suit the locations. So in the end, one of the big changes along St. Clair were the shelters. So they resulted in a far superior corrosion resistance, which you'll know if you go to the Spadina line. The shelters there struggle with that. They incorporated seating, their contemporary design, a consistent language for the entire length of the corridor, and they actually also incorporated some landscaping, which you can't see in this image, unfortunately, but you'll see it when you check the website. The other thing that was added, and I'll draw your attention to this side of the image, was this section of every shelter. This is an early photo, so the TTC hadn't put up their map yet, but every shelter would have a map, a community information space, and my favorite part, the interpretive plaque project. So we had a student at the time, a young woman, Kate Kuziak, who spearheaded this entire project, essentially interviewing the community and installing a historical interpretation of that particular area on every shelter. I think it's something quite special for the community and for the area. In addition to that, each stop, not every shelter, but each stop had public art installed on the shelters. So it was through a juried competition. We felt it added an urban enhancement to the area, and something great was it acted as a wayfinding system. So you begin to recognize your stop by the public art that's installed. And here are just some examples of some of those images of the art. And again, you'll see them much better on the website. But they're all quite different, quite unique. And lastly, on the culture side, is the Poetry in the Streets initiative. So we worked with the then Poet Laureate, Pier Giorgio De Chico. He curated the Poetry in the Streets, talked to local residents. All the pieces were by Torontonians, and I think as much as possible by people in the community, in the St. Clair community. And they're situated sort of dispersed through the corridor, sort of like an Easter egg hunt. They're little, the intention wasn't to draw a lot of attention to them, but rather that they be stumbled upon and found. This is another one at Guns Loop. It's a little washed out, but it's a panel here. So that takes me to intensification, and that's sort of something that's new for this community, and it's new for a lot of different communities. The community I live in is it's happening there as well, and it's a challenge for some of the residents. So what you're looking at predominantly along the corridor is going to be mid-rise intensification. What does that mean? Well, it's usually something that's between 5, 6, up to 12 stories. But again, it's the height defined by the right-of-way width. It's planned by the city, so we're trying to organize where people are going to live and where they can be supported by services. This is another rendering of another project along St. Clair at Parkwood. And a number of these are actually built now. And as mentioned, the corridor is diverse, so the precedent's already set around Avenue Road, the more tower-type construction. It's a different typology there. But again, the density is increasing. There are new projects. There is a lot of interest in development. And this is one of the nodes at Bathurst and St. Clair. So, placemaking, an interesting opportunity that the Avenue study identified was throughout this construction, there's an opportunity to take, and this is a pre-construction shot of the Lansdowne Loop location. Again, I'll help you see what's significant here. There's access to the park behind the community center right here, but to get there, you had to walk along the paved road surface where the buses came through to get there, a very unsafe condition. There wasn't a good access to the community center or a second access. And then this space here wasn't very accessible either. So this is a rendering of what we thought could happen. A reduction of the driving space for the buses. So the TTC streetcar had a far smaller space, and that space was given over to community use. So this is what it looks like now. There's seating, there's planting. There's a few more examples of that. I wish you could see it better. It's just this is a close-up of the garden. Bicycle parking. Now, access to the park is right off of the sidewalk at St. Clair, and it takes you directly back to the park, and there's also now better access to the community center. This is the second location, the Guns Loop terminus. Again, it was very, very tired looking, and through improvements of the paving and a significant amount of additional landscape space, the area was improved. There's additional bicycle parking. So this is a location where the streetcar comes through. Over here, and then also where you would transfer to the bus to continue west along the corridor. This is the corner of Guns and St. Clair, and this is one of those poetry locations. Just another shot of the terminus. Another shot of the terminus, and this is a cedar sound wall and privacy wall to separate the residential from the terminus. This is pedestrian access from the community. The community actually didn't have access from the west side. They had to go all the way around and come through, so this is a planned shortcut. So just to sum up, and I was hoping to leave as much time for questions as possible once we get through all the presentations. While the intention of the project was to make a more consistent streetcar line, there was so much more that happened. The streetscape was dramatically improved. Some of the sidewalks were widened. The tree canopy was increased. Public art was introduced in the form of sort of conventional art, and then the poetry as well. And then, of course, the biggest and perhaps most controversial is the intensification. We know people are coming to this city in large numbers over the next several years, and we have to have a place to put them and to move them. And higher order transit is the best way to do that, which is what we have on St. Clair. And to be able to build upon the existing established community that's here is just I think a great place to do that, and a sensible place to do that. And then, of course, the streetscaping that was done and the public locations that were improved upon, like the terminus points that I mentioned. And that's the end of the presentation. I look forward to talking with you folks about it.